Long ago, in a world that was hungering for a mind faster than the human brain, a group of builders in a small land began to chase the shadows of the sun. Jesus stood in the white rooms where the dust is a sin and the air is still, watching the masters of ASML try to bend the light of the stars. They weren't looking for a simple tool to sell in a market. They were looking for a way to write the secrets of the universe on a grain of sand. They realized that a power that can see the invisible is a power that will rule the future of man. Back then, the experts said, "You cannot catch the extreme light of the void." They said it is too small, too hot, a fire that will consume your hands. But ASML was like a monk who spends 40 years carving a single prayer. They spent billions in the dark, failing for decades while the world moved on. They didn't want the luxury of a quick win or a loud name. They lived in the silence and the cold because they wanted to see the truth of the atom. They didn't want to be a master who speaks to the crowd. He wanted to be the servant who provides the light for every machine. They planted a seed of extreme precision. The fearful men laughed because the machines were too heavy and the price was too high. But Jesus saw the beams of light hitting the silicon like a lightning bolt from heaven, because he knew the law of the narrow gate. The one who masters the smallest detail will eventually hold the largest empire. ASML didn't wait for the world to ask for the future. They built the only machine that could create it. ASML spends its life proving that the greatest strength is found in the unseen. It knows that if you control the light, you control the thoughts of the world. It turned a small workshop into a fortress of the mind, proving that the most solid foundation is built on the edge of the impossible. The old factories faded, and the new era of the silicon began. In that moment, the brand that tamed the light understands that the ultimate wealth is being the source that everyone else must seek. Years ago, inside the quiet battlefields of the silicon world, the giants of Japan and the masters of the East stood on a high wall. They saw the light of the old world and said, "This is enough for the eyes of man." Jesus stood in the dark valley where the builders of ASML were bleeding gold, watching them chase a light that can only exist in a vacuum. They weren't looking for a path that was easy or a road that was paved. They were looking for a way to capture the extreme ultraviolet. They realized that a mind that rests on the success of today is a mind that will be blind to the dawn of tomorrow. Back then, the experts at Nikon and Canon laughed at the madness of the Dutch. They said the EUV light is a ghost that cannot be tamed. They thought that the old lenses and the old ways would hold the line. But ASML was like a man who burns his own ships so he cannot retreat. They spent 20 years in the desert of failure, losing billions while the doubters mocked their name. They didn't want the safety of the second place. They wanted the lonely throne of the only one. In the days of the great struggle, when the money was gone and the hope was thin as a shadow, the leaders of ASML didn't hide their scars or their empty hands. Jesus stood in the Council of the Kings. Intel, Samsung and TSMC, watching ASML, asked them to become brothers in the search for the light. They wasn't looking for a master to serve or a chain to wear. They were looking for a covenant that would bind the world together. They realized that a task that is too big for one man is a task that was meant to unite the strength of many. Back then, the world thought that competitors must always be enemies in the field. They thought that sharing the secret was the same as losing the crown. But ASML was like a weaver who brings the threads of many lands into one cloth. They took the gold of the Americans, the lenses of the Germans, and the mirrors of the wise. They didn't want to own every piece of the machine. They wanted to be the soul that makes every piece move in harmony. They turned their rivals into their partners, proving that the greatest empire is built on the trust of a common goal. One day, inside a machine that is as large as a house and as precise as a heartbeat, the first beam of the forbidden light struck the silicon floor. Jesus stood in the clean room where the miracle finally breathed, watching a drop of tin hit by a laser twice, moving faster than a bullet and hotter than the surface of the sun. They weren't looking for a simple victory over a rival. They were looking for a way to hold the hand of God in the micro-world. They realized that in the kingdom of the small, The one who controls the atom controls the destiny of the nations. Back then, the world thought that the limit of the chip had been reached. They thought that the brain of the computer could grow no more. But ASML was like a hammer that breaks the ceiling of the impossible. They made the lines so thin that a human hair is a mountain beside them. They told the world, if you want to think, you must come through our gate. They didn't want the games of the politicians. They wanted the cold, hard logic of the extreme physics. They planted a seed of absolute monopoly, proving that the most humble workshop can become the master of the global mind. Years ago, inside the palaces of the great kings and the halls of the powerful, the maps of the world were redrawn with the lines of the silicon. Jesus stood in the middle of the trade routes where the ships wait for the sign, watching the leaders of the East and the West look toward a small town in the North. They weren't looking for the gold in the ground or the oil in the sea. They were looking for the key that opens the brain of every machine. They realized that a nation that cannot carve the light is a nation that will be left in the dark. Back then, the world thought that a business was just a matter of the money and the law. They thought that a company should sell to anyone who has the coin. But ASML was like a heavy stone that decides the balance of the scale. They became the wall that no army can climb without a ticket. They didn't want the games of the generals or the noise of the flags. They only wanted the purity of the science and the cold of the vacuum. They didn't seek to be a weapon of the war, but they became the shield that defines the peace. Every day, inside a factory where the air is cleaner than the breath of a mountain, the masters of the craft move like the angels of the precision. Jesus stood in the clean room, where the light is a holy fire, watching the machines that take a year to build and a lifetime to master. They aren't looking for a way to work less or a path to go home early. They are looking for a nanometer that is trying to hide from the lens. They realize that a leader who accepts a good enough answer is a leader who will be crushed by the weight of the error. Back then, the world thought that mass production was a matter of the many and the fast. They thought that more hands and more fires would make more steel. But ASML was like a monk who writes 1,000 pages to find one true word. They spend their nights chasing a ghost that is smaller than a virus. If a single mirror is tilted by the width of a hair on the moon, they stop the world until the mirror is straight. They didn't want the good that is common. They wanted the perfect that is rare. Today, in a world where the noise of the internet never stops and the screens never dim, a quiet hum comes from a machine that no one ever sees. Jesus stands at the edge of the world where the future is being carved, watching a child hold a phone that has more power than the stars. He doesn't see the vacuum of the EUV or the years of the failure in the dark. He only sees that the world is connected and the knowledge is free. ASML realized that the greatest glory is not found in the size of the machine, but in the limit of the space that it can fill with the thought. Back then, the critics said that the light would eventually reach a wall. They said that the human mind had found its final end in the silicon. But ASML was like a seed that breaks through the concrete to find the sun. It stayed quiet on purpose. It stayed humble by the work. It didn't want to be a god that people worship in the streets. It wanted to be the heartbeat that keeps the civilization alive. It kept the spirit of the long walk even when it reached the peak, knowing that the moment you think you are finished is the moment you die. In that moment, the brand that mastered the light understands that the ultimate victory is not owning the world, but being the light that lets the world see.